So, afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this Fireside chat with the British Community Society Ethics Group. We're looking at doing a focus on the BCS Code of Practice, and so we're pleased to have Catherine Flick here, who's going to be a focal point for discussions around the Code of Practice, partly based on some work she did, along with some of the delegates here today, looking at the ACM Code of Ethics and Practice. So Catherine Flick's a Professor of Ethics and Games Technology at Staffordshire University, which includes ethics in video games, looking at responsible technology and its use. So what we have is chat style approach to it. So initially I'll have a few opening points for Catherine to respond to, and then we'll explore some of the discussions later on. So we know we have various experts and others in the delegate list already who can add to the discussions, and also everybody here is welcome to answer the questions as well. So I suggest is just to avoid any issues with audio. If you've got questions that occur to you or points you want to raise, put them into the meeting chat. So we'll have a sort of initially kind of open forum in terms of the faster chat style, and then we'll go on to more of a open Q&A aspect as well. So hopefully that sounds okay for everybody. Have any initial questions or queries? If not, so welcome, Catherine. I think we invite you to talk to us because we've been looking at the BCS Code of Practice. Essentially, I think it's described on the BCS website as a code of ethics, and we'd discussed in our group about some of the things we might learn from other groups that looked at similar issues, and one of which, of course, is the Association of Computing Machinery, the ACM, who debated their own code of conduct a couple of years ago, and I believe you were involved with that, along with Golgota, who's also present today and is as part of our ethics specialist group. So we thought we'd maybe start with that focus and go on to maybe a wider discussion on some of the ethics challenges in computing. So I thought maybe initially, Catherine, tell us a bit about what sort of ethical dilemmas and issues did you think these kind of codes could help address? Hi, Catherine, I currently hear you right now, so
We seem to have lost her. I can't see her anymore either.
no, so I think I was going to say
I don't see her
Catherine
either.
now. Oh, that's curious. Well, while we're waiting for Catherine to return, I'll message you as well, see if we can get her back online. Okay, I suppose open it up to the floor in a sense. I know we've got some of the members from the special group here. So there's Don and Bernd, in particular, looking at the attendees. So Don, I know you're involved with the ACM Code of Practice.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a bit about the kind of ethical dilemmas that you were trying to address in that Code of Practice?
Well, first off, there were lots of functions of codes of ethics. Lots of people thought they were baseball bats or to beat people on the head with. One of the things that has been in education and computing is that there are ethical issues and there are ethical responsibilities. There was a time last century and this century where people think everything is okay, as long as you can do it with a computer. So for me, one of the major functions of a code of ethics is to educate people that, in fact, computer professionals have some very common beliefs of responsibility. Sometimes they get distracted from them. And I mean, that was a joy of the Code of Ethics when we had people all over the world joining in. And so that's an important function. One of the problems with codes of ethics is people tend to think locally. So the ACM Code of Ethics, in order to make it easy for me to get it through the ACM, I opened it up to the world and said, if everybody else in the world accepts it, ACM ought to do it. And of course, that was an easy win. So education about what values are, the more people who adopt a code of ethics or similar principles in a code of ethics makes it harder for miscreants to say, well, there's no ethical issues in computing. So those are my big two. And I have pneumonia, so I'm not going to talk as much as I normally do.
Okay, Don, well, thanks for what you've said there so far. Yes, so again, you may have seen in the Catherine's about to join us again, so I'll admit Catherine back, and she can help take over the talking there. Yeah, we had a text message in the meeting chat. Ben received a message from her. She'd had a computer crash.
I'm so sorry. My computer just hard crashed and I couldn't get it back. So I'm on the alternative computer.
No worries, Catherine. It's the joys of these online meetings.
To see her.
I know, Don. It's so nice to see you. It's really nice to see you, Don.
Well,
yes,
in your absence, Catherine, Don helpfully dropped in to help fill in the gap we had.
Right.
When we realised you'd vanished. So yeah, we're talking about some of the sort of ethical dilemmas and the points of these codes of ethics, in particular the challenges that you face of getting the ACM on through in an appropriate form. I mean, from your experience, how did you find working on that and the updates to that kind of ethics?
Right. So, I mean, it was very enjoyable to start with. I had a really, really good team. I have to say that because Don's here, but actually, seriously, it was a very, very good team. I wouldn't have kept going back if it wasn't great, right? And so, we worked really well together. And what I really liked about it wasn't just kind of us coming down from our ivory towers and saying, you know, thou shalt do this, you know, in a kind of a top-down way. It was, we went out to the members of ACM and we basically kind of did a mixed methods approach. We took many different sorts of data. We collected a lot of data. We basically did massive surveys. We did kind of discussion panels. We published drafts in the communications of the ACM, and we got feedback on those. We consulted with ethics experts and people who are kind of interested in codes of ethics, more generally speaking, from outside of ACM as well. And then, of course, there was our team who was sort of I was actually a member of ACM to start with when I first started working on this either. So I was sort of drafted in a little as well, but yeah, I've stuck around. But yeah, and then, you know, as we kind of progress through the stages of updating the code, the group the key group, the steering committee, we kind of we would get together and we would work through all of the feedback. We'd work through all of the data collection that we'd had. We work through feedback that we got from the committee on professional ethics members as well. So and our members, and we gave conference papers. So we did a whole load of different things to try to capture as much information as possible from essentially, you know, as diverse a group of people as we could, in order to try to capture what we called in the code the conscience of the profession. And I think that was the key thing we wanted to do, is we didn't want to feel like we were imposing this upon members, but that we were working with members and with experts and with the general public and people who might be affected by by the sorts of things that our members would do, we wanted to kind of work to build this whole thing together with them. And I think that was the key to I really think that was the key to the success of the project. You know, in terms of things like the acceptability of the project as well. And I mean, you're never going to please everyone. We certainly had a few people who weren't so happy, but they were not happy in ways that we were quite happy to let them remain unhappy in, if that makes sense. So we were quite happy to, you know, we were very pleased. Obviously, we also had very good we had a lot of support from the ACM's, you know, management, and that was really important as well. Don was the key person who was kind of negotiating with them a lot of the time, and I think that was once again, that was part of the strength of what we were doing, because I mean, when it comes down to it, it's not, you know, academics are all well and good. We're, you know, we're quite happy sitting and thinking about stuff. We had some industry people working with us as well in terms of the team we had, but it was largely, you know, that this can turn into very easily largely an academic exercise, and that was one of the things that we wanted to really avoid doing. So yeah, I think that's the key experience. You know, it was a really interesting. It was a fun project. I got to know people, really interesting people. I got to work with some really cool people, and it ended up having a lot more impact than I actually thought it would in the end as well, which is really good as well.
Thanks, really interesting to hear that. It's one of the things from what you were saying there occurred to me. We just talk about the various people involved and the various groups. Obviously, it's the ACM code for this one, but there's a lot of international input to that. Myself, ACM UK, a lot of people say it's heavily influenced by the US. But how do you find the international views on things like this? Because I'm sort of teaching ethics myself. There's different contexts to that sometimes, and different perspectives on what's acceptable and isn't, often culturally based. Did that have much impact on the work of this, or was there kind of is the technology community more uniform in its approach?
I mean, that's a good question, right? Because you don't want to be you don't want to, you know, end up in a kind of moral relativism conversation, you know, because that doesn't really serve anything, right? But I think so a couple of things. I mean, in terms of the nitty gritty of the day-to-day, what we were doing, well, day-to-day, you know, the times that we were working on this, I mean, it was a largely American cohort, you know, of people that were mostly involved at the top, the upper, I guess the executive committee, and there were certainly some things that I came in and I was, you know, I was yammering on about that. They were all like, what are you talking about? Why do we need to, you know, worry about things like various protected characteristics that aren't part of the US set of protected characteristics and things like that? You know, why should we care about, you know, GDPR style, you know, rights, data rights and things like that? And these are some of the things that I kind of came in and had to, you know, push the envelope a little bit to kind of break through some of the more American centric you know, default thinking, I think, and I think that's one of the things, if I might say with Don here, that actually that he appreciated was the, you know, the fact that, you know, I was there, you know, kind of pushing those different perspectives on things. In terms of more international, I mean, obviously we were sort of largely, I mean, obviously we're largely Western, quote unquote, group, and so although there are ACM, you know, ACM is a global organization, so we were hoping that when we were working with the membership and, you know, getting feedback from them, that the diversity of the members would come through in the feedback that they provided. And that was actually one of the nice things about the fact that we did have such a large group of professionals all around the world, is that I mean, we went through a lot of data, and I mean, we had a massive qualitative study that had like 20 something questions on it, and we were asking qualitative questions, and Don and I sat through and we read through almost all of them, and we had over 4,000 responses, and it was just ridiculous. I mean, it took up almost like several months of my life just going through this data, right? So we tried very hard to not just say, oh, well, we'll just pick a bunch of random ones and see what they think. We really wanted to try to capture the edge cases and the sticky bits that people might, the bits that might bring in the diverse voices from outside of US and European perspectives. And I mean, I'd like to think that we were in some ways successful, because there have been organizations outside of English speaking, outside of US and European spaces who have taken on the ACM Code of Ethics. So the IFIP is probably one of the big ones, where they've taken that on as a representative of multiple different country groups, for example, and they've basically taken the ACM code and made it their own, which, we're very, very proud of, that it has that sort of worldwide appeal, right? And it does speak to some sort of, we'd like to think it does speak to some sort of lower, order of values and things that computing professionals find important. So yeah, it looks like Don wants to jump in here, so I'm happy to pass the microphone.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. Yes, Don.
Just two things. First one is the business about multicultural that you hear. The Code of Ethics is about computing professionals and the way they do business. And the should not be startling thing, every computer scientist who's worth his salt says, yes, you ought to do testing. No disagreement between India, China, and the US, if they are being moral. I mean, people may say I'm too busy to do it. So the multicultural thing is a distraction. I don't care which hand you use to shake hands with. That has nothing to do with whether I'm going to test your code. That's the multicultural thing, or an oversimplified reaction to it. The other thing that makes the code different, most codes of ethics are canonical thou shalt nots. And if you want to read an inspiring piece of stuff, you read the ACM Code of Ethics, which says, this is what you ought to try to do. This is a direction you should go in. And that educational stuff is, it's not a smack your hand, it's, this is what we believe in. Let's try and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I fully, I mean, I think, just to sort of further what Don said in the first bit is in terms of the multiculturalism. Yes, I think, on the very ground issues of things like testing and that, these are kind of more universal values across the computing profession, right? I mean, some of the devil is a little bit in the details, though, right? In terms of how you then, like, in terms of things like privacy, how you interpret privacy might change in different spaces, but that's something that the code is kind of flexible on, and it really encourages you to take up that reflective exercise and to kind of, it doesn't say, don't do that. Like, as Don said, it doesn't say don't do this. What it does is it suggests things for you to think about that when you're going through your decision-making process, to consider as part of that decision-making process. So then, that's where things like local norms and customs and things can kind of come into play there as well. So it's not so much a imposition, it's more a sort of a structural foundation that then can be, we're not using this as, it's not a prescriptive, it's an aspirational code, right? So it's more about what the possibilities are rather than, and how to kind of think through potential issues rather than it is a, hopefully that's the aim of it was to do that more than a kind of an impositional, American focused centric idea of how the world should operate, right?
Thanks. Yeah, that sort of clarifies the approach. I mean, moving on from that, in terms of obviously the update was a few years ago now. What we're looking at in terms of the ethics group for BCS is how our current code of conduct is sort of fit for purpose in a way and how it's used. But in terms of the ACM one for today, do you think you need to make changes to that due to things like generative AI and the new opportunities that's created and the new things we're seeing, or is it kind of encompassed already in the guidance there?
Right, so it's a really good question, because one of the things that we really wanted to do throughout the whole process of creating or updating the code was to make it as future-proof as possible. I mean, obviously, we don't have a crystal ball, we can't see what's going to happen in the future, but we didn't want it to be kind of stuck in the 2010s, late 2010s. I mean, if you look back at the previous code before that, it talks about things like security and, you must remember to lock the doors of your server room and things like that, right? I mean, these are the sorts of things we were wanting to try to avoid. So we're wanting to more capture things like values rather than specific instances of those values. And as we were going through, you'll notice that we don't have too many examples of actual specific technologies. And that's deliberate because we didn't want to be kind of stuck in a particular zeitgeist. And so, yeah, it's that was very, very deliberate. However, I mean, this has also made it, I think this makes it more resilient when it comes to things like emerging technologies. So I went through generative AI and I had a look through the code because I did prepare for this. And I basically found, so in terms of generative AI, if I was doing a very brief read through the code and looking at the principles that would be appropriate for that, I mean, you may not have a copy of the code with you. I won't go through all the details, but let's just say principles 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, 2.1, 2.2, 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.6, and 3.7 would all apply to generative AI. So, and the key one actually is, in this particular case, is actually principle 2.5, which I'm going to just read a particular section of, because machine learning was actually one of the things that we did actually put a specific reference to in the code. And we ummed and ahed about this many times, went forwards and back. Should we use this as an example? Should we not use this as an example? And eventually we kept getting all these questions about it. What about machine learning? What about machine learning? So we were like, okay, we've got to put something in here. And because originally we had a thing about basically future risks, right? About looking at future risks of technology. And so 2.5 is give comprehensive and thorough evaluations of computer systems and their impacts, including analysis of possible risks. And there's a specific statement in that thing that says extraordinary care should be taken to identify and mitigate potential risks in machine learning systems. A system for which future risks cannot be reliably predicted requires frequent reassessment of risk as the system evolves in use, or it should not be deployed. And I think that's a fairly strong statement about the current kind of AI hype cycle that's happening at the moment. And I think that's also, though, quite a resilient one, because machine learning models are not going to go away. They're going to change, right? But the underlying value is that if you can't predict what your system is going to do, then you need to be able to to scaffold that with the right sorts of approaches to monitor what the outputs are and to pull it if that isn't, if it isn't reaching the requirements, right? So I think that in terms of these emerging technologies, so far, I mean, I've used this code to look at non-fungible tokens in crypto assets. I've looked at it. I've been sort of doing a thing recently on looking at some video game stuff with regard to this code, as some of the emerging sides of that, and so far it's stood up. I mean, despite the fact that these emerging technologies certainly weren't really thought about when we were actually creating the codes.
Yeah, just I think there's a danger of cementing things around code examples, which will change, as we've seen drastically in very short time in computing. I mean, linking on from that in terms of actual examples, though, one of the things we've seen here in the UK in the last sort of 8 months is in headlines. I mean, again, I've been using it in examples of teaching for several years about the impact of software going wrong. But it's the Horizon scandal with the post office here. I mean, in terms of the sort of impact we're seeing of that, obviously the harm it caused to postmasters, to their families, the harm it's done to the post office brand itself as an organisation. What do you think that sort of example tells us about the need for ethical IT professionals?
Well, yes, it does. I mean, obviously, and I think that this is a space where there's this actually opens the question of where does a code of ethics or a code of conduct or professional ethics, where does that sit in terms of a kind of a like an infrastructural way in terms of how a country, you know, does procurement, like governments do procurement, how they run quite, you know, important infrastructural systems like a post office. I mean, we've seen sort of similar sorts of issues with things like, you know, baggage handling in large airports and things. They're kind of a smaller scale. But you know, this is, I mean, certainly, I mean, on the one hand, we've in the ACM code, one of the new things that we put into the code was actually the importance that looking at systems that become part of the infrastructure of society, right? And so I mean, actually, when we sort of wrote this, we were thinking about things like social media and stuff like that. But I think, you know, but broader infrastructure is actually also really important in terms of this, right? So it was, you know, recognize and take special 3.7, recognize and take special care of systems that become integrated into the infrastructure of society. And this means basically what this means is that if you run a system or you provide a system that is, you know, part of this infrastructure, you have extra care to take on top of that, right? And so, I mean, this is where, you know, how do you actually force this? How do you get this to happen though, right? I mean, you know, it's all well and good. I mean, the code of ethics from the ACM in terms of the ACM is about individuals. It's not about companies. So it's very much about, okay, well, how do you, you know, how do you make this part of, like, how do you stop this from happening in the future, right? And this is where conversations around things like regulation, about things like potential licensing for, you know, I mean, there's been discussions certainly. I mean, Bernd Stahl's here. He's well versed in the roundabout of how do we actually integrate responsible innovation and ethics into, you know, companies and organizations and governments. I mean, there are conversations around things like requiring licensed professionals for procurement, for example. You know, would those sorts of things work? At the moment, there doesn't seem to be enough of a kind of a drive for that. I mean, this is, I suspect, unfortunately, it's going to be one of these things where, you know, a body of evidence against that shows the harm that can be done when you don't have these sorts of, like, I don't know, some sort of more restrictive system in terms of who can actually provide these sorts of services and this sort of infrastructure. But there's also very big pushback, you know, from professionals, because of course, you know, what is the computing profession? How do you define what a professional is? You know, is someone that works in the finance department a computing professional, or are they an a finance professional? You know, and these sorts of things start to get very complicated. And one of the projects I worked on when I was doing my PhD, actually, which was many years ago, was with the Australian Computing Society. And one of the things we did there was a study of whether there was any appetite in Australia for professionals to become licensed, like in some sort of way, right? And the idea would be that the Australian Computing Society would do the licensing, and there was basically zero appetite. I mean, this is back in the, you know, mid 2000s, so it's sort of not you know, not a total world away, but still, you know, a lot of things have happened since, right? And it would be interesting to get kind of that temperature again to see if there is any more you know, whether the benefits outweigh the disadvantages now that we're starting to see some of these more kind of infrastructural issues happening, right? I mean, like you require sort of licensed civil engineers to sign off on large building, you know, plans and things like that. Maybe you need to get licensed software engineers, or some sort of, there needs to be some sort of process in place where, you know, the responsibility has a lot of teeth behind it, right? Because at the moment that's not so key. Bernd's got his hand up here, so I think there's good space to bring him in too.
Yes, thanks, Catherine. Yeah, okay, Bernd.
Yeah, no, I'd like to ask you a question, Catherine, actually, based on something you've just said. So I've been part of this conversation because I'm on the BCS ethics group, and I think the BCS code is a bit aged, and that's why we suggested let's talk to the ACM, because you've done this refresh activity, and that's all good and well. But what just dawned on me when you were talking is the question, but do we need computer professional codes at all? And the reason why I'm asking that is, isn't computing at this point such a general infrastructure activity that it's entirely impossible to say you're a computer scientist or you're not a computer scientist? So isn't the person in accounting, the person in marketing, aren't they using models? Aren't they employing all sorts of IT stuff? And can we draw a line between who is a computer professional and who isn't? Or shouldn't we just have something like a professional code in general and say, take responsibility for what you do and do it well?
I mean, that's a good question, right? I mean, it sounds to me like that's you know, a couple of PhDs right there, to be honest. I mean, because it's a good question, right? I mean, the reason we have these things to start with is because we have professional organizations, and you know, and the reason we have professional organizations is because, you know, they've kind of grown out of the need for, you know, sort of a much more older, you know, you know, 20th century kind of, you know, idea of what the profession looks like. But I think, you know, computing has changed so much, and it is now part of everybody's day-to-day life. But I think there's a difference. I mean, just this is me just kind of, you know, brain dumping here a bit. I think there's a bit of a difference between the people necessarily that like, I mean, there's this kind of classic people who make versus people who use kind of dichotomy, right? But then that's becoming more and more complicated with things like, you know, prompt writing and things, you know, people customizing software for their own use, for example. I mean, so I mean, I don't know is the answer to that. I think there's a good project there to define. I mean, certainly in the ACM code, we were very aspirational. We wanted to basically get people to self-identify as computing professionals. So it wasn't so much, and also as aspiring computing professionals, right? So we were looking at students as well. But it was very much I mean, I think, you know, there's things to be found in this particular code of ethics, I think, that would apply to people who are, you know, using spreadsheets in finance, and also who are using, you know, who are like what I would call like the hard computer scientists, right, software engineers as well, right? And I think that there's I mean, there is, yeah, I mean, maybe that's just what we need is a much more broader, you know, do things right. But but then, you know, there are some specifics. I mean, this is a classic, you know, what is computer ethics question, right? So, you know, Jim Moore was asking this a long time ago, right? Why is computer ethics a specific type of ethics? And I think that, you know, the questions come back up, they come around, you know, again and again, but I think there's still something that's kind of specific about the relationship that people have with technology. And I think that there's, you know, there's something to be said about that that's different from potentially other professions, I think.
Yeah, so it fits in with that. You know, what I was going to ask about, Catherine, following from that talk and looking at the ACM code, and back to the Horizon scandal, because I guess as developers, we know what's underneath the hood sometimes, which the end users don't see. And one of the issues with the Horizon scandal was about developers knowing issues. And if any of you have seen the program about the Horizon scandal, but I kind of see one of the issues is one of the obviously developers at back-end support who in the end was encouraged to blow the whistle. I think it's the phrase in the ACM code.
Mm-hmm.
It's something we did get identified as the ethics specialist group did a survey of members earlier in the year, and had a report published a couple of weeks ago on living with AI and technology now. One of the key things there was about whistleblowing and about how far we do that if we identify our problems. I think in the ACM code, that's just got the kind of one mention in 1.2, Catherine. It says about,
yeah,
it may be necessary to blow the whistle, and then, but equally identify some of the, the dangers of doing that incorrectly as well. Do you think there should be maybe that's something we could expand on in an updated code from a BCS perspective? But whistleblowing itself, as again, that is maybe goes back to national context. There's different issues around what protection you have as a whistleblower and where your duty is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I think the UK has a fairly resilient whistleblowing set of laws. But obviously, when we were writing the ACM code, we had to sort of look more at the principle of blowing the whistle as opposed to, specific kind of legal definitions of it. And this was actually one of the things that we discussed a lot at the time. I mean, we discussed, trust me, every sentence in this we discussed like many times. There is not one sentence that is like just sort of oh yeah, that's fine, chuck that in. But one of the key, like we were talking about, well, how far do we go with whistleblowing, right? Because we don't want to suddenly say, yes, we'll back you up if you blow the whistle, because we don't necessarily know whether they're going to be doing that in the right way. And also, like, there's the whole legal ramifications of that. So as a professional organization, you don't want to say, oh yes, we'll be there for you, but because there's a lot of follow-on from that can get quite complicated, and especially in America with lawyers, right? And so so we didn't want to make kind of overstate the kind of the what we expect of a professional there in terms of what the ACM can provide, but we also we thought it was really important that it be brought up, and especially really early on in the code, right? So 1.2 is right at the beginning, basically, in the avoid harm section. And so yeah, I mean, this is why we say things like, a computing professional should carefully assess relevant aspects of the situation before reporting any risks, right? Because it could be that could get them into trouble in their location in a way that they don't have the sorts of laws that we have here in the UK to kind of back them up, if that makes sense.
In the US, we don't have a lot of these liability laws for software. It's very tough to prove negligence and things like that. But the codes of ethics have been used in legal cases as what a standard of professionalism is in the profession. So I can tell you, I've been an expert witness in cases where the code, I have to say this carefully, was not treated as a law, but treated as a target that you didn't aim at.
A benchmark, yeah.
And, there have been multi-million-dollar lawsuits that have been settled with the Code of Ethics, or as one of the strong points. Have to say this carefully. It wasn't the only point, but it certainly directed things in a good direction.
Yeah, thanks, Don. That's one thing I did wonder again, sort of rising from that discussion, was how far these codes of conduct, codes of ethics, how far they sort of encourage accountability. So if you're defining what you ideally should be doing, does it then help people see they're accountable? Do you think? Is it something that might link in with legal cases?
But they're mostly forward-looking. They're positive. Go this way.
Oh, but that doesn't mean we don't get, people complaints, sent in when somebody breaches the code as well, right? And that happens with well, I'd like to say, it is an unfortunate amount of frequency, and I'd like to say we get no reports ever because everyone, is always behaving professionally, but unfortunately that doesn't happen. And I think one of the things that the code does do now a lot better than it did before was have follow up with an enforcement. There's an enforcement protocol, and there are various stages of kind of sanctions that can be taken if the complaint is upheld. And these are all done in a very kind of, it's in quite a formal investigative way, and there's a very clear and open procedure that takes place, and it's it actually, one of the issues with these codes of ethics that's constantly kind of brought up is that they don't have any teeth, right? And this is, who cares if you're kicked out of the ACM? Well, some people do care, and it tends to be, people that have professional obligations that involve ACM like ACM conferences, for example, or being able to publish in ACM journals. So there's a to a certain degree there is a bit of backup now, and there wasn't so much before. Yeah, so I think that's one of the things that is good about the ACM code now is that we do actually have that backup. It's not just it's not pure. I mean, it is aspirational, but there's also like there's the carrot, right? You know, go and be professional. Here's how you can do it. Here's how we'll support you. And then there's also a bit of a stick. You know, if you're not good, no, if you're not acting, you know, in accordance with the code, you know, there are consequences of that, right? And some of those might be legal consequences, but some of those are not always legal consequences, but they are consequences that mean that we don't want you to be part of the ACM anymore.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges we have with the BCS code as well, because it's not mandatory for jobs in the same way that to be active medical practitioner, you need to be a member of the sort of BMC or there's different medical requirements, and some organisations, some engineers have to be certified engineers. We don't currently have that in computing. It's one of the debate points, isn't it? I think whether or not for certainly safety critical systems should be a requirement that people have some form of professional recognition. And equally, I think also with things like professional certification as well. Just one of the things that members may be aware of, the BCS have recently launched a new certificate on the ethical build of AI, and that's links in with some of the things being discussed here. So trying to identify the sort of behaviors they want developers to have building AI systems, frameworks they could use to determine that. Interestingly, going back to I think Ben's point earlier, there's two versions of it. One's for it was inspired by the investments and banking in London. So they did a version of it more for the banking and finance users, and one for the actual developers and developers in general. In fact, in the end, before the AI part was so general, it wasn't just for one group. So there's that idea that there's a certification people can have to demonstrate it. But again, so far it's not mandatory to have that. But I guess that goes on to the there's just a comment there from John about you could argue if the Horizon system was a cyclical system. I guess at that point you say, do you require that people working on it have professional recognition? But in terms of the kind of, I guess, way forward, we're looking at for today's event was also the BCS Code of Conduct. I just wondered, what do you think from your experience with the ACM one? I don't know if you've maybe seen the BCS one.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think we should be doing with our code of practice? Again, it's various good things, bad things, I suppose, about it. But wondered in a general sense, what did you think? Where would be good next steps for that?
I think it really depends on what you want it to do, right? So, I mean, do you want to make a statement about how the profession should be, or do you want to about professionalism and what professionalism looks like, or do you want to kind of go down the route the ACM has done and go for make a statement about what the conscience of the profession is, right? How the profession thinks that, you know, day to day, like what values are important to it, and what things are important to the profession, right? I mean, a lot of the criticism that we had when we were starting this process is that, you know, we shouldn't get into the weeds of these particular values. We should stick to what is a professional, what is professional behavior. And I think the BCS code does that to a certain degree, and probably does that reasonably well. I've looked at it, but I haven't really, you know, interrogated it very firmly. But I mean, it doesn't really step outside of that. And I think that the question that you need to decide amongst, you know, yourselves and with the membership and is what do you actually want to say? Do you want to stick to this kind of slightly detached, you know, this is what professionalism is, or do you want to kind of start looking at how do we want the computing profession in the UK, what sorts of behaviors, what sorts of norms, what sort of expectations do we have in terms of their kind of the values that they should hold, the responsibilities they should take, you know, how and things like that, and what we should be building towards in the UK in terms of an ethical profession, right? So I think that it's a question. I think that's the key thing for me when I look at the BCS code, is that it does kind of take that slightly detached view And the other thing also is I noticed that there isn't really there's in terms of things like violations, there's a place where you can report violations, but there's not really a lot of detail about what happens. It just says we'll investigate, and like, what does that mean, right? And I think that certainly one of the things that helped to kind of really push the code was showing that we had an open, transparent, as much as we can in terms of transparency. I mean, there are some rules that there are many rules that we have to follow in terms of the actual content of the complaints, but the process itself is transparent. It shows exactly what's going to happen, and things like that. So I think that's also a big key aspect that is missing at the moment. But I mean, in terms of the details, I can only recommend the approach that we took, because I think it was really it was a really helpful approach. It really got us thinking about what is important to the profession. And sometimes, we would disagree with a lot of the feedback. It was some of the feedback that we got. I mean, we changed a lot between each version. And you can actually, if you go to ethics.acm.org, you can actually see the progress of all of the changes. You can see essentially like the differences between each of the versions. There's a summary papers that we put into CACM about what we changed and why we changed them, and I think that those are actually really important documents that show, they kind of capture capturing the reasoning behind making decisions about what we put in the code and what we left out, and whether we had must and whether we had should and whether we had ought and whether we had the wording. I mean, like I said, this was a highly engineered piece of work in terms of the wording, because we wanted to make sure that everything as best as we could captured the essence of what we were wanting to put forward in terms of the values and the the aspirational like things that we wanted people to kind of take on with this, right? So yeah, I mean, I think those would be the main things. I think, yeah, deciding which avenue you want to take. And I mean, I have my own opinion on that, but like you can I'm a member of BCS, so you can just poll me with the rest of the members, right?
Neil, can I possibly come in there?
Yeah,
Looking
sure,
back at the history, I'm now virtually retired out of active service in BCS, but back at the time Horizon bubbled to the surface in 2013, and I think Catherine's point about we need to have clear procedures and processes for people to visibly and easily complain about systems, because basically we could have got hold of the Horizon problem via our code of practice and ethics back in 2013, I suspect. Somehow it just never really got to the table. So I think that would be one of my concerns, that we do not need to lose the sharpness we've got now. If anything, we need to make it easier for people to actually complain in a constructive way and hopefully have no more horizons. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think seeing how people can raise issues and understanding that is an interesting one. I think we did a contact from a member of the BCS sort of panels, and I think that they have very few cases to deal with, which hopefully is positive. That means there's not many things happening, or maybe people just don't know how to raise it, or don't see that as an issue to raise with us.
I think also there's a question here where as a national organization, as opposed to the ACM, which is an international organization, as a national organization, I mean, theoretically have, you have a kind of the door into government, right? And to be able to then, make recommendations or bring these to much higher attention than just, within ACM itself, where we, maybe the worst thing we can do is kick somebody out of the club, sort of thing, right? But if something like Horizon were brought to a national organization, I mean, certainly as a sort of a member of the public and interested, member of the computing professional, as a computing professional, I would expect BCS to kind of make a huge fuss about it, right? Talk to the media, talk to government, get things happening, right? And that, I think you've actually there's a lot of things that could potentially happen in this space using this as a mechanism to do that certainly ACM couldn't really do, because ACM's not really, you know, able to kind of say, hey, government of Japan, you should sort this thing out, right? I mean, it's not really something that they have the ability to do. But I think if you've got those, you know, ins with the people that actually make decisions, this is a way that you can actually influence those, right? But I mean, that's a personal opinion, I think.
Yeah, no, that's a good point there. Yeah, I mean, again, this isn't a different status in that sense. So BCS is a chartered institute. So it has those sort of recognition as well. So the last point I'd sort of got for our sort of dialogue initially, Catherine, was around again the BCS code in particular. So we have this BCS code of conduct for BCS members. I was looking at it a while back, and I was interested when I was searching for some stuff for teaching again, and it's interesting, and again, I mean, Bob may add to that from the history of it, but the BCS Code of Conduct doesn't mention ethics, actually. It mentions it once in a context, it doesn't cover ethics for businesses, and the only other ethical word is in so it doesn't do. Whereas the web landing page that directs you to it describes it as a code of ethics and conduct. So I wonder, as kind of, I suppose, a weighted question, do you think a code of ethics and conduct should mention ethics?
Well, yes. I mean, I think I've just been looking at the chat, right? And I think the fact that, I mean, there's you've called it a code of practice in one place, it's called a code of conduct in other places. I mean, I think that there's certainly, you know, the issue of what do you call it is something that sort of needs to be settled, right? But I think that I mean, the thing that's really made itself very clear to me recently is that people are interested in this stuff, right? And you know, there's a lot of grassroots codes of ethics for AI, and you know, ethical licenses, and there's a whole load of like grassroots movements to try to make software engineering or computing or what, you know, AI or whatever it is more ethical, right? So ethics is in people's minds, and I think that if you're looking, I mean, if you Google, if you search for sort of, you know, BCS ethics, it's, you know, a code of practice isn't quite the same, right? And it also might confuse people, because I mean, to be honest, I looked for code of ethics and I thought, oh, here's a code of practice that's slightly different, I'll keep looking, you know. And so I think, yeah, I mean, there's definitely yeah, I think that's definitely an easy win there in terms of low-hanging fruit. I think, yeah, it definitely needs some sort of ethics thing, if only to help people find it easier and understand that that's what it is. Because I think, I mean, professional organizations, I mean, codes of ethics are a fairly standard thing for them to have now, and I think if it's not called a code of ethics, it just kind of confuses people. So yeah, I think that's an easy win.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, so that was really interesting, really good discussion. We've come to 1 o'clock, so we'd kind of planned originally on a 1 hour main kind of content. A few people had to drop out, unfortunately, with other commitments. But I thought now maybe I'll open up to the audience if there's particular points we want to make or questions like to ask Catherine. Again, as I say, there's many experienced colleagues here in the virtual room. So if there are any other points people would like, I think there's, yeah, I think David noted, yeah, the name of the code is confusing. I think, yeah, there's also the issue of the horizon and its different moral issues, which
So
gives linking the fact that it is that ethical moral point.
Can I jump in on that one, actually, because I think that's a really good point, because part of the ACM code also talks about being a professional leader. Like, there's a whole section just on professional leadership principles, and it's all about, you know, being about how your workplace should run, essentially. And it's about things like you know, these sorts of questions about contractors versus employees can all kind of be, you can see some of that. You certainly read the code and find some guidance for that sort of thing, and things like you know, time and delivery, and this is one of the classic things, right, in terms of computer science and software engineering and anything, you know, it's the I mean, there's the 80-20 rule and all of this sort of stuff that's popped up, right? You know, there's a whole bunch of ways of looking at testing versus time pressures, right? And I think that there's, you know, this is, I mean, there is space in codes of ethics to look at that, right? But I mean, it's understanding the nuances of that. It gets quite complicated though. And it's, yeah, I mean, this is why, you know, one of the things we didn't say is like we sort of talk about things like testing, but we talk about in terms of things like competence and what was the other one? I'm just sort of scrolling through here. There's like, you know, high standards of professional competence and high quality and things like that. So I mean, it's not about you must test to make sure there's no bugs at all or anything, because that's impossible, but it's about, you know, what does that realistically look like? And then also about things like communication, right? So how do you processes of communication about things, you know, whether something's like potentially impossible to deliver on time and things like that. So all of that is captured within the professional responsibility section of the ACM code. So I think that, yeah, I mean, theoretically, if someone were to go and investigate the horizon, I mean, there's a whole load of things that obviously there were puzzle pieces that a bunch of people didn't know about, and they kind of came together in a kind of a dramatic way, right? But and very harmful way. But there are little things here and there that potentially could have been, you know, a code of ethics could have been useful for if, and there's, you know, the big caveat here, right? If the people involved were, you know, members, if they were understood the code of ethics, if they had the right, you know, the education to be able to use it effectively, and all these sorts of things as well, because it's not just about having a code of ethics on a website as well. And this is actually one of my big beefs at the moment that I get really cross about, is people say, oh, but you have a code of ethics, people know there's a code of ethics, therefore they're going to be more ethical. And that's just rubbish. I mean, unless you understand how to actually use a code of ethics and use it properly. It's not just about reading it. Just read it once and you're suddenly ethical. It doesn't work like that. There's a lot more that needs to be done. And this is why we have a little PDF that got released, and I think it's been there's more case studies and things now. But I mean, there's a method for using it for analysis written up in here, for example. So the care, which I think we've changed to proactive care now. It's slightly changed since we published this document, but there's a lot of you know, support mechanisms around actually how do you get people not just reading it and going, yep, okay, I read it, I'm good, but actually actively using it as a, you know, as a decision making assistant, basically, right? Decision support tool, that's the right word I was looking for.
Yes, yeah. Thanks. Okay. Yes.
Yes, let me, we, in developing code of ethics, we didn't want it to be a piece of wallpaper.
Someone did make a very cool poster, and so it is actually a piece of wallpaper somewhere.
Well, yes, people did that. But we developed a tool called proactive care. Go to the ACM ethics.acm.org website under using the code of ethics, and you will find a decision support tool to show you how to. You take this, Catherine.
Yeah,
my voice is gone.
That's fine. Yeah, so we have this, yeah, the proactive care thing will help, like basically steps through a way of analyzing the particular issue, and then yeah, looking at it from the perspective of the code of ethics, and to help you. I mean, because obviously when you look at a code of ethics, there's a lot of values, right? And at various points, you're going to have conflicting values as well. And it's how do you prioritize those? These sorts of things get, you know, it's not just a simple thing of, yeah, read the code, do the, you know, check off the, you know, I did this, I did that, you know, now I'm good. It's sometimes these things aren't as easy. It's not as easy as that, right? And so you need to think about, you know, can I sacrifice a value? You know, can I rethink the problem so that the issue goes away? You know, how do I actually kind of deal with this? And this sort of the analysis and reflection exercises that we put in there should hopefully help with that theoretically. Think Gad.
Neil, can I just come in again on that? And looking back over the history of the BCS Code of Conduct, which I know for many years now, basically, I don't think we've done a major overhaul or look for at least a decade, Neil. And I think the whole theme, and turning the clock back something like sort of 13 years, when ethics was just really emerging as a subject, I don't think ever that's really been. I know when ethics first emerged in BCS, we did look at it briefly, I think then, but I suspect not since then. So I think, Neil, bringing it up to date in light of current terminology and calling it a bit more than just a code of conduct would be very helpful.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, that's one of the things we've been talking about in the ethics committee, and I think part of the idea of this meeting today was to maybe give us a catalyst and a sort of call for action. I think so give us wrong, David. Is it David? You had a hand up for a while.
Yes, I've got an example of something that's just not very complicated, but a bit subtle. So I work as a developer, and sometimes I get to sign off other people's work. So this is an example of a type of thing you might have to deal with. So I have a look at what I'm signing off, and the criteria is literally put the data in the database. So it's quite difficult to even construct a lie to say it's done. There's no criteria. Put anything, put some stuff in some place. So I did some I thought I can clean this up. I can do the analysis and figure out what it should be, read the code, try and get some agreement, and get the customer to agree. And then I can then I can say, yes, both of these people, the developer and the customer, this corresponds, this is fine. And then I find the customer doesn't know, not interested. The developer says, brilliant, I have done it. And I realize there are 4 ways this can be done, and they each give you a different number. And it's hold on, you've done it, but you're not aware that there are 4 different answers. So there's a 25% chance you might be right. I don't feel lucky. So, you know, obviously I can't even construct a convincing lie. If I wanted to just, you know, if I was unethical, I can't even justify that as a lie. So I have to say, well, you're going to have to help me. You're going to have to say which way this goes. And I find the customer who could sign it off, they have the button, the approve button, just like I do. So if they don't care, they can push the button. But they're putting pressure on me to sign it off. And, you know, unfortunately, I'm one of these awkward people. I just can't, don't see how I could even lie convincingly. And as a contractor, it's quite difficult. If you're an employee, I think you have more robust rights, and you're not in a position where the boss that's telling you just get it done quickly is not the person that's renewing your contract. So it's not exactly like bribery. Do what I want, and good things will come your way. It's more like, if you don't do what I'm heavily suggesting I want, then you might not get what you want in future. It's a bit more subtle somehow. And I gather with the post office, I read some of the literature from Horizon, and there were some issues in there around contractors not wanting to put their heads above the parapet. So I think I was a bit lucky, because I was in a position where I don't have the information to push the button, so I can't even justify it. I'm kind of wondering, people are more experienced with the code of conduct. Is there anything in there that I could use to help myself with these kind of problems?
You mean
just pointing to it?
I mean, if you mean the existing BCS one, I mean,
or the ACM one.
Right. Okay. I mean, so it's about things like quality of work, right? And so on the one hand, I mean, okay, so there's a few competing interests here, right? So you as a contractor, you want to do a good job because you're a contractor and you want to get more work, right? So you want to do
keep
your
the
job.
customer sweet, but I don't want my liability insurance to explode.
Well, yes. So that's it. But liability insurance, right? You don't want to do a bad job because then if something goes wrong, you are liable,
then I'm
right?
nuked.
Yeah. So that's then yeah, exactly, right. So that's some pressure that can go back towards the developer, right? Is that, as a contractor, you're liable, and so you can't sign this off until you're pleased with it. And then, basically, I mean, maybe that means that you don't get more work with that company in future. But do you I was just going to say, but do you really want to work for a company that puts that sort of pressure on you, is the question, right? And so then there's I mean, obviously today's day and age, it's not great to lose jobs and things, but these are all the things that you need to think about.
Very tricky.
It's very, very tricky. I'm certainly not going to say it's an easy decision. And, there's certainly times and situations where, that you might need to make the not so good decision, right? Like you might need to just press the button. But then, there's certain, like, at some point you've got to draw your line, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what if
which way to jump?
Well, but also then think about, if you're thinking about then what future harms might happen. I mean, if that database is full of, I don't know, people's personal information that is used for making decisions about whether they get, benefits or something like that, you might have a different line than if it's a bunch of like database entries about sales for last week, right? These things are all part of the decision-making process, and things like certainly the ACM code. I mean, I'm not sure the BCS code it'll have a very specific perspective in terms of professionalism, looking at things like quality of work. But what I like about the ACM code is it allows for more kind of holistic views of, you as a professional in a professional setting, what is expected. And yes, the quality is there, but then, it's about sort of the harm trade-offs and things like that come into it as well. And that, I think, allows for a lot more of the understanding of how we actually do work as well, right? And then so I always think about things like, what happens if someone reported you, right, if to the ACM and said that you'd been in breach of their code of ethics? Would you be able to justify the decisions that you made according to the code of ethics, right? And so if you feel you can do that, then you've probably taken a reasonable path. But there's never going to be an easy thing of saying, yes, okay, I'm not going to do that because it will, I'm not going to do that because it will harm people, because, it may be that some sort of there may be, I mean, there's the classic kind of harm question in terms of, a little bit, some harm now may prevent a lot of harm future, and things like that, in terms of things like surgery, for example, right? Cutting someone open to do a surgical procedure. I mean, but then we can't make the same arguments about things like, I mean, and this is once again my own personal opinion, and this is the line that I wouldn't say, is that, things like, making better, more accurate weaponry, right? I mean, that might mean there's less harm if I do that work now, there's less harm in the future, but do I really want to be doing that sort of work, right? So these are really complex questions that I think certain basic levels of kind of professional conduct just don't really get at the meat of. And I think codes of ethics like the ACM code at least provide you with a mechanism that you can use to help you make that decision against a known threshold, a known good of what the profession should be looking like, what the conscience, how the rest of the profession thinks about that sort of stuff. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And what Don was saying earlier turns out to be very useful, it being an international code, because we had developers in 4 different countries. So, the US, Canada, some other countries, and Britain.
Finland, the Canadian Information Processing Society adopted it, Finland Computer Society, and others. But there's always the other thing. If appeal to conscience doesn't work, you can make a veiled threat. I have at times convinced people to put in some ethics into the code, into their system, even though it cost a little more, because when they say, well, yeah, but I don't care about that. And I say, well, gee, what happens if the public finds out that you intentionally left that out? And I never say I'm going to say anything, but I just ask the question.
I was aware by
They
raising the
don't fire
question,
me because they'll know I'll tell someone.
I was aware that
Hire
by
me and I
raising the
get to-
question,
We get an ethics win.
you can't even pretend, you can't even feign ignorance. If you raise the question, I can't sign this off because now I'm definitely in the hook.
Hmm. Yeah, and once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? That's the thing.
Exactly.
And,
Yeah.
And so
then a
yeah.
lawyer can prove that you're aware.
Yeah. So then it becomes about your own personal credibility as well. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but then there's trade-offs with that, right? I mean, yeah, maybe it means you never work for an unethical business again, and so it means you get less, fewer job offers. But I mean, maybe that's the price you're able to pay for that as well. But then there may be a situation where you're not able to pay that price, and then it's about, okay, well, what can you do with the tools that you have? And I think that what the code does quite well is help you do that as well, like help you potentially change internal or at least have mechanisms to help, and things you should be striving for within an organization as well, right?
Okay. One of the things that came up is that I think different people in these teams are accountable to different extents. As a developer, I'm very much aware that it's very easy to collect an audit trail of everything I was doing. I checked in this code here, I checked in this configuration there, I deployed this, I asked this question in this forum that's logged. It's very easy. I can imagine a lawyer digging through all of this and having a legal team. It's very easy to put me on the hook as a developer for what I do. But if you are, let's say, in a very agile teams, it's all rather informal, it's very easy to ask somebody. And maybe it's just a suggestion. It's not so much a command or a statement as such. It's possible to suggest things very informally.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is then the classic kind of, cover your butt a bit kind of situation where, if you have those sorts of conversations that make you uncomfortable, make notes about them. Contemporaneous notes are really important, really good to have. And they can help sort of you show what happened at various times as well, and they're reasonably. I'm not a lawyer, okay, so but they can help to show at least what was happening at the time, right? And so I think that I mean that's what I would suggest there is, and
somebody
and then if it becomes
at British Telecom years ago told me that blame works like electricity. It flows along the least path of resistance.
Yeah,
I'm quite keen. I don't personally want to be the fuse that burns out.
Yeah, but I mean, this is why having things like robust codes of practice and codes of ethics is actually really, really helpful to individual professionals as well, right? Because if you can point to the code and say, I did everything with in good faith, in the best with the best efforts as and following the code, then that's a fairly strong statement to make, right? And I think that's. I mean, it's definitely a benefit. I mean, certainly after we released the new code of ethics, after we released the new code of ethics, we actually had a whole bunch of people join ACM just because of the code, right? And we actually I've got evidence of people saying that they were joining up because the code was what they wanted the profession to look like. That this is something they believed in, and they thought it was. Felt it was good, a good thing to have behind them, basically. And so, there's a certain amount of protection that gives you as well. I mean, I don't know about BCS, but I'm sure I don't want to speak for the ACM here, but if someone came and said, "Look, I'm getting basically I've done everything by the code, and I'm having trouble with this particular," I mean, there's sort of like. I mean, like Don said, it's been used as a benchmark of professionalism in court cases. So I think that if you've got that sort of thing behind you, that's quite a strong foundation, really.
It's
Yeah, I
also
think
used
these
by
things can
some
be
companies.
they can give you that a framework to help decision making yourself, a basis to discuss with others. I mean, in a lot of situations, there's not with ethical dilemmas in general, there's often not a clear-cut answer either, though. It depends on exact details. if any of you have seen the some of the programs about the space shuttle disasters, and again some of them and the challenges engineers had telling people above them about faults they could see, and still it went ahead. And again, that's a case that we use in teaching ethics in my course here at Hull. We use one of that as an example, where engineers are seeing one thing and telling people, and things didn't happen, and you see disastrous consequence sometimes of that. Right. But yeah, these things are unfortunately they're not always clear cut, but it can give that framework to work from. As I say, the ACM wants a lot more resources from the BCS one. The BCS one does have elements of it that are relevant, but I think that they're quite careful. They're very short, so in a sense they're more implicit in the BCS code as it currently is. So just given timing, maybe there was a question being raised by Adrian, which again maybe Catherine or Donna or
about quantum computing.
Again, in one sense, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say quantum computing is a really interesting case because it's one of those ones where we don't really know what's going to happen. So it's going to be one of those situations where I think it's going to what the impact of that. I mean, so sure we know what some of the techniques in that are, but we don't really know what that looks like on a bigger scale, right? And so I think that's going to be one that will test the code of ethics when we get there. And I think that's what it's going to be one of those ones where we just kind of have to wait and see as it develops a bit more, because I'm not fully up to date on the latest quantum stuff, but from what I've read in the past, it's not quite at the stage where we have kind of it's more still kind of proof of concept than anything else. But
there's a BCS quantum informal group initially. It's got a formal status, and I'm part of that to give some input on ethical issues of it. But yeah, just say it's currently the technology isn't developed enough to cause, I suppose, challenges yet ethically. Some discussions we're having are about if and when it gets to a point where you can break encryption so easily.
Yeah, I think that's the key one, right?
Yeah, and then do you certify things at that point, and that's the ethical aspect of it. Do you certify it in a sense like a weapon?
Yeah, well, I think that things quantum and breaking encryption. I mean, that's got obviously quite a drastic impact it's going to have, right? I mean, that's more drastic than pretty much any other technology that we've got, apart from maybe encryption to start with, right? And so I think that's, well, I mean, I don't want to say it's above my pay grade, but I think it's that's going to be something that there's going to be a lot of interest in doing something about before it gets to the point where it actually breaks anything, right? And so whether we, a bit like the Millennium Bug, we try to kind of start working to kind of get around it, or if it's something that I mean, because it seems like it's almost inevitable if it does take off, that sort of application of it is inevitable, right? So how do we start working around that? And maybe that's part of the kind of the ethical questions we have to start talking about. But yeah, I mean, I think watch this space. As with all emerging technologies, there'll be a lot of run up to the actual technology, kind of a lot of speculation about what it can and can't do. There'll probably be a hype cycle about what it can and can't do, and then as the dust settles a little bit and we start to see what the actual impact is, there will be a bit of a rearrangement of what how institutions respond to it, right? And I think that's kind of, yeah, watch this space, really. It's a good example of one to look out for, because it's like a bit like AI, quote unquote. I mean, we've seen with machine learning and AI in various forms has been around for a really long time, and it sort of just muddled along for quite a while, and then it suddenly just kind of exploded in terms of the impact of it, right? So yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that when quantum becomes more impactful, we'll be ready for it. And I think there's definitely space for ethics to be asking those questions. And I think that's, but I think at this point it's a little bit more of an academic exercise than a future, like let's not put the cart before the horse a bit, but you don't want to be to mix my metaphors, you don't want to be closing the stable door either, right? So after both horse and cart have left. So yeah, it's a hard one. It's a really, really tricky one. Emerging technologies are really tricky to kind of, how do you kind of capture those? Really hard. Yeah.
I guess again, it goes back to your points from the ACM code. A lot of it is actually, they're sort of generic principles to apply, and they're not technology specific.
Yeah, I mean, I think quantum would probably work in the kind of the, if you don't know what's going to happen kind of side of things. But I mean, probably by the time it's actually having, actual effect on people, we probably know very well what it does. And so a lot of those other values will come into play, right? So quality and honesty and openness and transparency and things like that. And then, harm obviously is going to be one of the big factors in that. How do you balance up the harm requirement? Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks, Catherine. And thanks everyone for the questions so far. So we're nearing 1:30, so I think my time sort of starting to wrap up really. So I'd like to say thank Catherine and Don and all the other colleagues here and who've here earlier and had to leave for contributions. Really interesting discussion. One of the points from this is we'll take some of this back. So Bernd and myself, his colleague Adam was here for the first half, the part of the and Don, the ethics specialist group of the BCS, and we're looking at what we can learn from this and look at revisiting the BCS code of conduct, code of practice, and hopefully become a code of ethics in the near future. Catherine, any final words you wanted to finish with?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just want to, once again, I just want to thank Don as well, because it's like really nice to see. I haven't seen him in a while, so it's nice to see you, Don, as always. It was such a really rewarding experience working with the ACM on updating the code of ethics. It was probably one of the most intellectually interesting projects that I've worked on, to be honest with you, and also like it makes you feel like you're doing something good in the world, which is good. But yeah, it's I mean, I think there's a lot of space for the BCS to really have an impact, especially in the UK. Obviously, like I was saying, if the BCS is, I mean, one of the things that we found was that we were really, one of the things we were a bit worried about was the ACM would think that we were going a little bit too far, but actually they were really supportive the whole way through, and they've really supported us, actually making strong statements about things like, especially like diversity, which was one of the most criticized aspects of the code, for possibly obvious reasons in terms of America, but things like that, we were, and also how much basically, yeah. So I think that the key thing is be bold about it. Do something that is actually going to make a difference in what the infrastructure, what the profession looks like in the UK, because you have a chance to do that, and you're in a really good position to do that as the Chartered Institute, right? And so take that opportunity and take that advantage, and actually, don't just sort of sit back and be passive and say, oh yes, here's what a profession looks like. Actually be bold and go and do something that actually makes a difference. And maybe we can stop the horizons of the future. Who knows?
Some companies, in some international companies, multinational companies, have adopted the code of ethics as part of the sign-on employment procedure for some of their divisions. So if you're going to work in this division, you have read the code of ethics, you say you will adhere to it. You may lie when you sign it, but it says, we can't fix bad people, but we can make people aware of their commitments. And that's what some of these multinationals have done.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, I think that's one thing we might discuss with BCS, how far we can develop
can
our
have that
code and then push that as a something that companies do. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I'll stop recording now. We'll be around for a few more minutes afterwards if any more general networking discussion. So thanks again. This session has been recorded on Zoom, so I think the BCS will share a link later on. There's various other resources I will put in meeting chat as well. So we'll, as the ethics specialist group, we'll organise an update on things generally for members soon as well. And there's a few other things happening in the near future. So if you watch out, there's a policy jam on ethics coming up next week. It's about the partly follow-up to the BCS Ethics Specialist Group report on living with AI and other higher stakes technology. So that's next week. You see the BCS events pages. And later on, I think in May, the BCS have got some events happening.